Along with extra time and lower instances of unpredictable weather, there are a variety of benefits that come with fall ESN application. Learn more at smartnitrogen.com.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio. I am Lindsay Smith. Joining me now is Brenna Grant. She's the Executive Director of CanFax. Welcome here, Brenna.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Let's talk about not the happiest story in the world, but an incredibly important one, and that is the state of the Canadian cow herd. What can we say about, let's say, the last 5 years as far as the size of the Canadian cow herd?
Well, we're down, and that's not surprising to anyone. We've had drought starting in 2021, and moisture conditions have been the major challenge for beef producers. And so the July 1st numbers from StatsCan showed the beef cow herd down 2% from last year, and we're down about 8.5% from the July 2017 previous peak of that last cycle. And things had been fairly stable from about 2017 to 2020. And then the drought hit, and we've seen most of that decline since then.
Mm-hmm. So what is the actual number as far as the estimate of how many cows Canada typically has on average, or what we think we have?
Like right now, we're at about 3.5 million head of beef cows. Our dairy herd is sitting at around 970,000. And lots of us have sort of that 1 million dairy number in our heads. And it's just been slowly shrinking as they've seen productivity gains on the milk side. Lots of us will remember when we had a herd of 4 million head. And so we are definitely smaller than that sort of 4-to-1 ratio that we historically had, now looking at about 3.5-to-1.
Okay. And so just one of the key things I think that sometimes we don't talk as much about, and perhaps this is something that we'll see more of, is the dairy component is still a key part of our beef production, in that we still have a significant amount of beef that would come from the dairy sector.
Yeah, and so that's coming in multiple different ways. First of all, we've had a decline in the amount of veal production as demand for veal product has shrunk. And so that means that some of those animals are now being finished to full weights and coming into sort of our regular beef value chain. But we've also seen, this change to sexed semen in the dairy sector, which is allowing them to be a lot more precise in what animals they're actually breeding to get their replacement heifers out of. And that allows them to actually then put beef semen on the rest of their cows so that they are a more efficient animal in the feedlot and more desirable by the feeding sector to finish.
Mm-hmm. So now the cow herd is one part of this, but of course replacement, so that heifer number plays a key role in that. Has the heifers on feed or that trend mirrored that of the cow trend as far as the grass is concerned, or has it actually had its own sort of trend up and down?
So we've definitely seen, and we continue to see, low heifer retention numbers, and even the July 1st numbers, which is always a soft number. And I'll caution everyone about that because lots can change in terms of crate checking heifers this fall and producers making final decisions based on winter feed that they have available. But it's one where, even though we saw a bump with beef replacement heifers up just under 1% on July 1st, we're still well below historical relationships in terms of the percentage of those replacement heifers as a total of your beef cow herd. And that really indicates that even though it's up, we're probably looking more at an a consolidation phase of the cattle cycle versus an expansion phase. We still need to see a lot more heifer retention before that happens.
So, and I guess that's one of my questions, is that, certainly from the, let's say, profitability side in the short term here, there's been some money to be made, certainly for the cow-calf producer, for the feeder sector as well. And this is, of course, tied to grass. right? And tied to feed, and exactly as you mentioned, what you've got for overwintering, what you're going to hold back. But how significant do we need that heifer retention number to be to actually signal that the cow herd is growing? I'm not going to ask if it ever gets there, but what would that actually look like if that were to
Well,
be the case?
before we talk about that heifer retention number, I actually want to talk about how do we go from liquidation to
Mm-hmm.
consolidation, because we've obviously been liquidating with the herd down up to the point of July 1st numbers. And that really has been due to the feed situation and drought, because the price signal has been there to keep animals if you have forage available. And so with the rain that we received in May, the first thing that happens is to slow down cow slaughter. You have to stop the bleeding, stop the liquidation. And that's what we've actually seen producers do. Cow slaughter is down 16% year to date. And since May, it's down 26% to be the lowest since 2020, which is when we were more at those stable consolidation levels. And that's sort of what we're looking at, is moving into a consolidation phase with improved moisture conditions here in Canada. And in the US, they also saw improved moisture in the spring, but they have some states that have moved back into more of a moisture deficit as we head into this fall. We've had some areas here in Canada where we've had some spotty rain in the last month, which is very welcome. Some of the US states haven't had that. Right. And they're really looking at, can we just stay in consolidation to stop the liquidation on this moisture piece, and really expecting potentially consolidation to potentially be longer in this cattle cycle than we've seen in past cattle cycles. Historically, a 10-year cattle cycle would have about 3 years in consolidation, where you're sort of up or down 1% as producers recover from drought, as you get improved pasture conditions before they start expansion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's going to take first a stabilization of the cow number before we really would ever even expect to see anything significant change in the heifer retention number. So does that put us out like 4 years, 5 years from now before that's even a realistic expectation? That sounds like a really long time.
It does. So when you think of, 3 years as a typical consolidation phase, and, this coming sort of 12-month period being year one of
Right.
that, you could sort of even think 3 years sounds like a long time.
Yeah.
But whether it is actually a long time or not really depends on three things. Producers need the profit signal to actually expand. They need the forage available, and confidence that they have enough forage available, not just for this winter, but they actually have a comfortable stocks of forage available for the next drought. But also their future expectations of the market. And I think with some of the market volatility that we've experienced in the last year on the futures board, there's just a wee bit of hesitance as well of producers really wanting to see prices stabilized at these current levels in determining what they're going to do, of how aggressive are they going to expand.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes that it can be lost on, if you're not someone in the cattle industry, how long it takes to get a calf on the ground to market weight, right? So it really is a long cycle when you think about replacement of that cow in the herd, or, a marketable animal for her. So imagine if I'm a cow-calf producer and I'm going to, sell stockers, that's a long time that I have to be thinking about, what am I going to get for this calf, this fall, next spring, all of those, it is compared to, say, grain production or sheep or pigs, the idea of trying to plan out your profitability 18 months, 2 years in advance, that's a huge risk management problem to solve.
And not only is it the financial aspect of that, it's asking what's demand going to be 2 years out. Because a lot can change in those 2 years. And that's really what they're doing, is this long-term planning of looking at what the market demand is and saying the market really is asking for more beef. on the market, and how are we going to provide that? Recognizing that we have a lot of flexibility in answering that question today with the genetics that we have in terms of feedlots being able to add more pounds at the feeding stage.
Absolutely. All right. So 3 years, let's say. So let's call this, or we will wait and see. I guess that's my next, or maybe final question is, how often does StatsCan sort of take that pulse on the cow herd? How often are we getting this number of sort of where we're at? Is that once a year, twice a year? How often would we see that? When would be the next sort of check-in of whether or not we're actually in this consolidation phase?
So we get it twice a year, July 1st and January 1st. So the January 1st numbers would become available usually early March. And that would be our next chance to sort of take a look at has the reduction in cow slaughter in the second half of this year actually allowed the herd to stabilize?
Right.
And have we actually seen some heifer retention, depending on what bred heifer sales happen this fall, but also will give us an idea after the fall calf run of how many of those heifer calves actually went through auction this fall and got placed.
Yep. Okay. Brenna, thank you so much. This is fascinating stuff. I appreciate the time, and we'll keep watching and we'll see.
You bet.